Welcome into a Monday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Pod. Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here with you as we are every Monday afternoon. Alex, big weekend as always in the NBA, but especially big with no football. Apologies to the Pro Bowl. I actually kind of like what they're doing with the Pro Bowl at this point compared to what it had become like a few years ago. But we had an extra large Sunday slate with the NFL kind of getting out of the way, 9 games yesterday. So we'll talk about some of our takeaways, some of the big injury updates from the weekend. Of course, we have the trade deadline coming up as well. So we'll talk all things deadline, guys who could get moved, guys who will not be moved, players that you should be stashing ahead of that deadline. But first and foremost, Alex, how are you? How was your weekend?
Doing well. Had a good weekend. Snow is seemingly all melted. Yeah, nothing too crazy on my end. How about you? I mean, maybe the biggest news, you got a full setup going behind you. The new house is looking good.
I got a full setup. I no longer am in a room where we have like half of the wallpaper peeled off and the acoustics are terrible. We're moving in the right direction here in the new house. Still snow on the ground, however, in the Milwaukee area, but we're supposed to hit like 55 on Friday. So you know what that means. I will be calling around and seeing if any golf courses are opening up to go play like the sloppiest round of all time. But relatively quiet weekend here. Had my wife's birthday party on Saturday. She spent the day with the girls. I went to the golf simulator and then met up with her later. But other than that,
already married, already enjoyed.
Yeah, right. I was at the range yesterday. The grind never really stops. All right, before we get into some of our main topics, and then of course, as always, we will take live viewer questions over the second half of the pod. So throw those in the chat. We're brought to you by Underdog, and Underdog Fantasy is the #1 platform for NBA best ball and DFS player pick'em contests. If you have not tried Underdog yet, new users get a first-time deposit match up to $100 and a free 6-month subscription to our site, rotowire.com. Just use the promo code RWNBA. That's RWNBA. UnderdogFantasy.com, or just go download the Underdog app. It's fantastic. You could use the promo code RWNBA to claim your free RotoWire subscription and that deposit bonus. You and I play on Underdog basically every night at this point, so really can't give that a stronger endorsement. FanDuel, we're also brought to you by FanDuel. You can tackle millions in prizes all through the NFL playoffs, which do come to an end on Sunday, so you might have to switch over to NBA over on FanDuel. But if you're new to fantasy, there's no better time to get in on the action at FanDuel, because right now new customers get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Playing fantasy for huge cash prizes on FanDuel is fun. It's exciting. You just draft your lineup and you watch your team move up the leaderboard. Pretty simple. Plus, on FanDuel, you can choose from full slate contests with multiple games, single game contests, season-long best ball, beginner only. Those are great, if you haven't played a ton of fantasy. But there's basically infinite types of contests that you can set up over there. I love playing the private contest with my friends, throw an entry in one of the big contests for the night as well. And the best part is when you win, you get paid right away. There's not some 2-3 day delay. That money hits your account as soon as those games end. So before the Super Bowl, make sure you get that 100% deposit match up to $100. Build that bankroll. Go to FanDuel.com to start playing for huge cash prizes today. FanDuel.com, or just go download the FanDuel app. All right, a lot to talk about from the weekend, Alex. We got to start with Joel Embiid. If you are watching or listening to this pod, you should probably be aware that things are not looking great for Joel Embiid. We knew he had the meniscus issue. They were being a little cagey about it. I think he had the MRI back on like last Tuesday or Wednesday, and really wasn't until the end of the weekend that we got a firm update. That came yesterday. He's going to undergo a procedure to repair a left meniscus injury. That was per Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. No timetable, but what Woj told us, Alex, is that he will miss an extended period of time. Do you have any guess what that means to you?
I think a month plus probably. Be tough to come back sooner than a month from meniscus surgery. On the Friday podcast, I was just not even acting like I was just saying it's a meniscus tear, because it clearly was. But they keep saying like, oh, it needs a procedure to fix a flap, and then all the legitimate Twitter doctors were like, no, it's a torn meniscus. He needs surgery. It's that simple. I don't know why they're doing a PR campaign over what this injury is, but no, I won't be surprised if he's out. If he's out basically through the rest of the regular season. It's possible that he misses, because I think some of the wording that Woj used and I can't remember it right now. I think the word like repair, but he's already had a meniscectomy. I think it's pronounced, where they shaved off part of his meniscus already. This is years ago. Um, so I don't think they can do that anymore, or he's going to have to run into like a Dwayne Wade situation where his knees just don't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's a brutal break for Embiid. We've been updating the MVP odds, each week, and I think he fell all the way down to around 50-1. Right after the meniscus injury, he's now off the board completely. So, obviously he's not going to meet the 65 game threshold. So we can cross that one off. Obviously having an MVP caliber season, no question about that. I will say, we kind of have to read between the lines on these updates because for whatever reason, the Sixers do seem to be very secretive about this. But, Woj did have a note. I can't remember if it was one of his tweets or one of his stories about this, that, quote, "The door is not closed on Embiid returning for the regular season." That's not super encouraging. To me, no. I wouldn't be surprised if he plays before the end of the regular season, but I think his fantasy season, to me, is probably over.
Yeah, I mean, most likely it is. I mean, I think it's safest if you have the IR spot just to keep him on your IR. But yeah, I wish the team was more transparent about this. I guess they'll have to see what the surgeon thinks, all that stuff about the timetable. But yeah, I mean, we can't be surprised if he's out for the year. So Embiid may end up pretty droppable, especially if you have I guess I would say a more progressive league that ends before April, maybe middle of March, late March. It's most likely that
leagues. Yeah.
One of those liberal progressive leagues, you'll probably have to drop him, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking up his roster rate right now on Yahoo to see if if there was a big purging over the weekend. He's at 99%. So, yeah. Most people probably just throwing him in the IR spot for now. I'm not against doing that, especially with the All-Star break coming up. We'll get some more information in the next 2 to 3 weeks, but yeah, I mean, he's so good that it's like, even if you get a week, like if he comes back for like the final week of your fantasy playoffs and you could make it that far, it's going to be huge. We're not, I think even if he's under like a minutes limit or he's rusty, like he's still going to put up crazy numbers. So I'm not against it. If you have the IR spot or you're in a league with multiple IR spots, like, yeah, I mean, it's Joel Embiid. So I understand not wanting to drop him. But yeah, it's brutal, man. I mean, he's going to miss the most important part of the fantasy season. Zach LaVine as well, the other big long-term injury news over the weekend. LaVine, his season officially done. He's going to undergo surgery on his right foot. They're saying that's going to be a 4 to 6 month recovery timetable. So to me, no necessarily like major change in expectations for the Bulls. I still think they're one of those teams that is just going to push for the play-in. They've basically been the same team with or without LaVine. It's not like this is catastrophic for the win and loss record necessarily, but obviously somebody who we thought would perhaps be, on the bidding block at the trade deadline this coming Thursday. And now that's out of the question. I mean, I guess a team could trade for him and view it as a future piece. But once again, where it kind of feels like we're going down the same path for the Bulls, where it's like, yeah, I kind of like some of these players. Kobe White's playing well. They're still stuck in the middle.
They're absolutely stuck in the middle. 23 and 27 right now. LaVine doesn't seem to really be impacting winning for them. And from a fantasy perspective, yeah, I mean, this is a lot more of what we've already seen. Like, it's going to be more Ayo Dosunmu. It's going to be more Kobe White. And maybe Pat Williams gets some more touches. Caruso, though he can never stay healthy either. But I think, like you were alluding to, we've already seen a lot of what this looks like when LaVine is out, because he's missed so much of the season anyway.
Yeah, I think, biggest boost long-term is Kobe White. Long-term meaning rest of season. Yeah, he's been able to pretty much maintain what he was doing, not quite to that same level with LaVine back. But, now that's, LaVine coming back is completely out of the question. So I think you kind of view him as that number 2, maybe even co-number 1 with some of the numbers he's been putting up alongside DeMar DeRozan. I think DeRozan is somebody who could be moved at the deadline, especially now with LaVine off the table. It's like the team start to think a little bit more seriously about DeMar DeRozan. Vucevic, I don't really know what the interest level will be. We've talked about him quite a bit on this pod, but Chicago, they're right where they should be, 9th place in the Eastern Conference. I would say that, like, if Chicago does choose to go in this direction, which is pushing for a play-in spot and just trying to get a couple of games worth of playoff revenue, I don't know that they can really fall beyond 10. It's like Atlanta has closed that gap over the last couple of weeks. They've started to play a little bit better. But after that, you got Brooklyn at, 8 games under 500, Toronto is sinking ship. They're 15 games under, and then you're down to the real dregs of the NBA: Charlotte, Washington, Detroit. So I do think, if you're Chicago, if you're a Bulls fan, you're probably sick of just being in the lower middle portion of the standings every year. But if they do choose to push for that play-in spot, I think they should be able to get it.
I think it'll be close. I mean, I think some of it does depend on what Atlanta and Brooklyn do at the deadline, because Atlanta, we've all heard the trade rumors about DeJounte Murray, and if you trade him, the team's already not good without him. So you might have to you move off of Capela and you just kind of hit the restart button potentially. And the Nets have just been kind of bad all season. Won't be surprised. Basically, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded, I think, anybody on that roster. Like, it seems like they'd probably prefer to keep Bridges, but I think they would move him. I think they would entertain offers for him. So I guess, yeah, technically the Bulls could make the play-in.
Matt Carmody says, if the Bulls trade Vooch away, Drummond would be worth adding. Absolutely. I mean, I'm holding him in a couple of deep leagues right now. Those are 16 teamers, so it's a little bit different. He's 27% rostered right now in Yahoo leagues. Those tend to be 10, 12 teamers for the most part. If we're talking, guys to stash ahead of the deadline, no problem picking up Andre Drummond. I mean, it's a 3-game week for Chicago. We'll talk about the schedule in a little bit, but this is not an overly fantasy friendly week here with the All-Star break approaching. So like a 3-game week this week is actually pretty solid. I'm in a couple of leagues where I'm dealing with some tough start-sit decisions that we'll talk about, but only about a third of the NBA has 4 games this week, and Denver, Minnesota, Portland, Utah all have 2. So I wouldn't really be scared away by a 3-game week this week specifically. But yeah, Drummond is absolutely on that list. And, even if they don't trade Vooch, I mean, if Drummond could just get to like 15 minutes a night, he's going to give you 8 points, a steal, a block, somewhere between 7 and 12 rebounds, if not more. And, there's always the possibility of if things really go south for Chicago, do they shut down Vooch? Vooch, he's already been injured earlier this season. So this year, to me, Alex, it is a little bit difficult to come up with like a long list of all these guys that I want to stash, but Drummond is absolutely on it.
My only concern would be, is it easier for the Bulls to trade Drummond than Vucevic? Like, yes. Vucevic on his guaranteed $60 million for this year, next year, and the year after. Yeah. Drummond's on a $3.3 million player option. So my worry would be that they actually trade Drummond into basically an equal situation. Everybody, not everybody, but people have mentioned, like, I think like OKC might need a backup big. I don't know. Like, I don't think people are thinking of Andre Drummond, but he would basically be free. He would basically be free. What's the downside of getting him on your team? So part of me would worry that Drummond himself gets traded, but I think he would actually play more or around the same if he got traded somewhere. So right. I don't think he's a bad pickup regardless.
I think there are a ton of teams in the Western Conference who would like to have Andre Drummond on their roster. One, he'd be an upgrade over a lot of the backup centers who are floating around. You think about a team like Phoenix, who maybe just wants some Yusuf Nurkic insurance. But I think you also have to consider, some of these teams that if you consider yourself a contender in the West, let's say you're a top 6 team right now, like think of the teams that you're going through, right? It's like you need somebody, just a body. I'm not saying that, Andre Drummond is a Jokic stopper, but you need a body like that. You need somebody to go burn some fouls, burn some possessions, to guard Jokic. If you're playing Minnesota, you got 2 big men in that starting lineup. The Clippers have Zubac and Plumlee and Tice. The Kings obviously have Sabonis. If you match up with the Lakers, that's one of the bigger teams in the NBA. You need somebody to throw at Anthony Davis. And again, I do not want this to be like clipped and go on Twitter and me saying like Andre Drummond, get him. He's going to shut down those guys, but he's huge. He is a massive person. And there really aren't that many of those guys with the experience that Drummond has floating around. Good point here by Dylan L. He says, Ayo Dosunmu is actually the clear winner right now in Chicago with LaVine going down for the season. Could easily be an end of the bench league winner for a lot of rosters. Provides great stocks as well.
Yeah, I've been a notable Dosunmu skeptic throughout most of my throughout the past couple of years. I think just because there have been a lot of times where it's like we all want it to happen more than he's actually shown it can happen. But this recent stretch by him has been very good. Yes. He started the past 4 games, but even if you extend it to his past 10, 16 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and basically 2 stocks. The 58% from the field and 46% from 3. That's going to come down a little bit, But then you're probably still talking about someone who's averaging like 13, 3 and 3 with good stocks, which stocks have been, again, something, a part of his game that has mattered. And it's really only upside from here on out. So definitely an ad in 12-team leagues.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think this is the best 10-game stretch that he's had really since he burst onto the scene as a rookie. His roster rate shot up over the weekend, up to 41% over on Yahoo. And yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I think it pushes Kobe White's ceiling higher the rest of the year. But if you're talking about somebody who goes from not really rosterable in a 12 or a 14-team league to somebody that you kind of have to have, and maybe you're not starting him every single week, but you're putting him out there on a 4-game week, absolutely. And really the defensive stats, which Dylan points out, I think are what you're really after here. I mean, the 3-point shooting, the shooting in general is going to wax and wane. I mean, he's at like almost 60% from the field during the last 10 games. Like, that's obviously not going to be sustainable, but 2 combined steals and blocks per game. He's got, a couple multi-steal games, a couple multi-block games, very good shot blocker for his position. So yeah, very good call there. I wanted to talk about Onyeka Okongwu, Alex, as a deadline stash. And I know in most deeper leagues, he's already rostered, but we may have missed our window. We should have done this pod yesterday, because now we know Clint Capela is going to miss 7 to 10 days heading into the All-Star break. And yeah, if you're in a competitive league and Onyeka Okongwu was not rostered, that probably changed when Ravers ran last night.
Yeah, I think so. Capela's injury, not to mention the impending trade deadline, I think made it the perfect time to pick up Okongwu, which is something, basically we've been saying for almost since Okongwu got into the NBA. But you just have to do it. You're like, we're basically trapped. We've been entrapped by Onyeka Okongwu's potential to roster him in these types of situations.
Yeah, what makes it difficult is Capela had been playing really well. It's like I've been caping for Okongwu to take over that job for like 3 years now, but Capela's putting up numbers, man. I mean, if we're just talking strictly fantasy, like before this injury, he's basically averaging like 13 and 12 with a block per game. Not reaching the same heights that he was at his absolute peak, but he'd stayed relatively healthy. I think he'd only missed 2 games prior to this injury. But he is somebody with a track record. I mean, he tends to miss 15 to 20 games per year, so this shouldn't be surprising. And good timing, I suppose, with the All-Star break, should be back after that. But at the very least, you're getting a nice 2 weeks here out of Okongwu. And I think looking beyond the trade deadline, for one, Capela could be moved. We just talked about all these teams, that need big men. I don't think it's out of the question that Okongwu could be traded on Thursday. But Atlanta, they're a team that they've played a little bit better lately. They could very easily, fall out of this play-in mix, especially, depending on what they do at the deadline. And I think we're finally reaching the point where maybe we could see a Okongwu late season come on, in the final month or so. Obviously, the per minute numbers have always been great. They signed him to an extension last year for a reason. So even if Capela remains on this roster after the deadline, I still don't really have a problem holding Okongwu in anything but shallower leagues.
No, because if they continue to be bad, then he is probably not going to play as many minutes. They'll just focus on Okongwu's minutes. And Capela's had some lower body stuff in the past anyway. So, he could get hurt for sure.
All right, I want to talk some Bucks real quickly, because this is near and dear to our heart. Before we get into listener questions, what the hell happened, man? What happened last night? I watched that full game. Bucks are rolling. Even Utah got off to a hot start. You're kind of thinking, here we go again. But Bucks put up a great second quarter. They're up double digits in the third. 40-13, they're outscored in the fourth quarter. We got another just disastrous Damian Lillard game. It feels like these are happening more and more frequently. I ran the numbers last night on Basketball Reference, just kind of taking a look at some different permutations. It's like number of games where he shot under 30% from the field. He already has more this season than he's had in any of the previous 6 seasons. You have to go all the way back to like 2017, where I think he's had 8 or 9 games now after last night where he shot under 30% from the field. You get similar results if you look at, number of games with fewer than 3 made 3-pointers, number of games where he's shooting under 25% from 3. So to me, the numbers back up the eye test, right? And then people will say, well, a couple nights ago, he's 5 for 5, great game against Dallas. Like, yeah, he's still mixing in very good games, but the consistency has just not been there. And, if you take all the way back to January 1st, which is 17 games, Lillard is shooting 29.4% from 3. So this is more than just a short-term slump. I mean, we're talking over a month. He ranks 197 out of 222 players who've taken at least 33s in that span, again, since January 1st. He's 40th out of 42 players who've taken at least 100 in that span.
Yeah, Lillard, I think right now, I mean, last night, he was dealing with an ankle injury before the game. I think that may have been some of it. Utah's also good at home, but that's not really what we're talking about. Middleton wasn't available last night. That meant Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder has been a whatever the opposite of a plus minus god is. Just a minus god. He's a minus 20 per 100 for the Bucks this year. He has been completely useless. He's slow. He's big. He's slow. He's old. He just can't do much anymore. And it's the thing. It's the Bucks starters that got killed. Like everybody in the Bucks starting lineup was basically minus 20 except Giannis.
Yep.
Great. Pat Connaughton was a plus 11, but it's like that continues to be the Bucks' issues. Is like when basically the Bucks' 4 best players are not on the court. We should mention Lopez also wasn't available last.
And neither
night.
Was Middleton.
Right. Yeah. Lopez and Middleton were out, but this is also the Bucks' issue is that when those 4 guys, Giannis, Lillard, Middleton, and Lopez are not on the court, and almost all 4 together, they get destroyed. They're horrible. So for the Bucks, I think, they need to figure out how to function when like only 2 of those guys are on the court at the same time.
Yeah, the point of attack defense, I think, is what really stands out when you watch these games. And I don't think it's a lack of effort, maybe sometimes on Dame's part, but the communication to me did improve right away. Like watching the first couple Doc games, they look more locked in on defense. They look less confused. There's a lot fewer possessions where Brook Lopez is taking the ball out of bounds and slamming it down because somebody missed a defensive assignment. But they're letting guys get by them. They're giving up so many easy looks. They gave up a bunch of offensive boards last night. Utah had 12 offensive rebounds for the game. There was a report earlier today, I think Mark Stein had it, that the Bucks and the Mavs have discussed a framework of a Bobby Portis Grant Williams trade. I don't love that. I think it is in some ways tough to quantify exactly how much Portis means to the Bucks, and I know you could argue that Grant Williams, for certain matchups makes more sense on defense. I don't know that that's what this team needs. I don't know if getting rid of Bobby Portis, who might not be the greatest defender, but he's at least going to bring it every single night. The fact that that's even being batted around worries me.
Yeah, I mean, it worries me too, especially since the Bucks don't really even have a backup center. They use Bobby Portis as backup center. If you were to trade him, then what? Robin Lopez?
I think so. When Doc did say last night I should have played Robin Lopez more. Also concerning.
He probably forgot Robin Lopez was actually on the team. But I think when you sent me that Portis report, I mean, my first thought was, I was thinking back to when he basically called out the team and Adrian Griffin around the play-in tournament. And I just wonder if Portis has just kind of had it, not just with like Adrian Griffin, who obviously was gone, but just with the roster as a whole, which obviously that's concerning because I do think what he brings for Milwaukee in terms of energy is fantastic.
Yeah, and again, tough to quantify. There are some numbers that would probably indicate that moving on from Portis would improve the Bucks defensively, but I think he'd be losing more in terms of what he means to that team than people would realize. One other observation last night, and props to my friend Preston Schmidt, who's a longtime Bucks fan, well before I even was locked in on the Bucks, texted me last night about how many assistants they have on this bench. I don't know if you noticed that. After he pointed it out, I couldn't stop looking at it. They go like 12 deep with assistant coaches. Deepest roster of assistant coaches I've ever seen.
I'm actually looking right now on the the highlights from the game on ESPN, and I do see the two rows of coaches. That is absurd. I actually can't remember the last time I've seen something like that.
Yeah, well, I think Doc brought in a couple of his own. Like they brought in Dave Yeager. They had brought in that some sort of defensive guy from Europe a few weeks before they fired Griffin. And I think Doc retained basically everybody and then brought in a few more of his own. So I'm going to have to we'll get a full update on how many exactly there were. But they were going 3 rows deep of guys with matching Q-zips last night. All right, let's hit some listener questions here. We'll continue to talk about players that we're stashing around the deadline and some rumors that have popped up. Matt says, what's up, everyone? What's up, Matt? How long before every team has these LED courts? Good question. That was kind of going around Twitter earlier today. I think it was out at the is it like the new Clippers arena? They were demoing something like that. I, you know, I'm open to it. I don't think we're super far away from something like this. I think anybody who's been to an NBA game in like the last 5 years has probably seen how they do this, like in pregame, right? Where they'll have these like crazy graphics where the court looks like it's falling in on itself, and then you can basically project whatever you want, and it's pretty impressive. I assume the technology has only gotten better, and if you look at the teaser video that the NBA put out, I mean, it looks cool. I don't think we're that far away from it, right? I think the question is, would it be something that's viewable in the arena, or would this be tied into, kind of like the metaverse viewing that the NBA is very much in on, with the Apple Vision Pro and all stuff like that. I think it'd be very distracting if you're playing on the court, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out for a like TV VR viewer experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll continue to try it out. Obviously, the NBA is way more into experimenting with like courts and stuff than they used to be. Yeah, I won't be surprised if it turns into a thing as long as the players think it feels fine or they don't think it's too distracting or anything. Assuming it is something you see actually in the arena. Because I remember, I think about like when they changed the ball in like 2013, or they tried to, and then all the players like revolted.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I think that was like right around the Olympics. For some reason, it might have been even earlier. Like I remember Jason Kidd specifically was like, "I'm not playing with this ball." But they will be demoing this, in practice over All-Star Weekend. They're going to use it, for like the celebrity game, for all the stuff on Saturday night, 3-point dunk contest skills. So we'll get a look at it. And I mean, my understanding is that it will be viewable in the arena in addition to television. And, I think this will be better for the TV product more than anything, which is, probably a slightly bigger concern for the NBA. But I'm very open to it. I'm very, very open to it. Again, as long as it's not distracting, one, to the players, and two, where you don't have so much stuff going on where you're like, all right, I don't even feel like I'm watching an NBA game. Like I don't know that I'd want to be watching Game 7 of the NBA Finals with an LED cord.
No, I just, I don't want it to be distracting for anybody. For me as a viewer, for the players, for anybody. And there's already enough distraction going on in the NBA. I get distracted if the court's colors are weird, like normal painted on. So that's those kinds of my thoughts.
We've come a long way. We've come a long way in the last 10 years. I don't think the NBA would have been nearly as open to this. I remember the Bucks had like a black type of court that they wanted to do back in like 2015 that the NBA was like, no, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work. It's too distracting. And now here we are with like bright purple and lime green courts all over the NBA. All right, good stash question here from Paul. He says, who would you rather stash? Scoot, Kennard, Keontae George, Shaedon Sharpe, DeAnthony Melton, Jacob Gilyard, either of the Thompsons, and how would you rank them in order of value? So we got a handful of players to try to rank here, Alex.
It might be easier to rank these in terms of like generally how I feel about it. It's gonna be hard for me to rank this many players in order, but here's what I would say. Like, I think Melton is probably the safest because we already know he has a safe role that he plays really well in. The problem is he's been hurt for a while, so that's a concern. But hopefully he's better after the All-Star break. Scoot and Shaedon Sharpe, yeah, I'm pretty in on those guys as stashes because the Portland's so bad. They also have a history of tanking late in the season and pulling their veterans, and Brogdon will probably be gone and stuff like that. It will still be tough for them because Simons is still going to be there, but we'll see what they do with Jeremy Grant. I'm worried about Kennard's health, but I think he is a good player to roster. Keontae is interesting for sure, especially if the Jazz get rid of some veterans. Again, Gilyard, Kennard, any of these Grizzlies guys, I have such little confidence that they can stay healthy or that the Grizzlies provide like accurate injury reports. And then I don't mind Ahmed and Ausar stashes, but a lot of those guys I mentioned, besides like Shaedon Sharpe, Scoot, and Melton, are in like one massive tier together. I guess I'd put those three I mentioned at the top, and then everybody else in their kind of their own tier.
Okay, I don't need to go through and like relitigate any of that because that was all very accurate. So I will default to your rankings on that. We don't need to spend another 5 minutes on it. But good question, and thank you for sending that, Paul. Mr. A, any relation to Dr. A? We have no idea. But Mr. A says who to drop to pick up Paul Reed. If he wants to grab Paul Reed, should he drop Josh Hart or Malcolm Brogdon?
Man, that's a tough question because of the situation, that Brogdon faces probably being a headliner of a potential trade. Even if he stays in Portland, he could get shut down. He's never been an especially healthy player anyway. At the same time, Hart's value is completely capped to whenever Julius Randle comes back, right? So we know Hart
and I think Anunoby to some degree, right? Like you look at the last week and you're like, oh man, he's playing 41 minutes per game. Like that ceiling lowers a bit when Anunoby's in there.
Julius Randle, we know the long-term extent of his injury, and Anunoby were a little bit less clear.
Yeah.
Both guys would get picked up if you drop them. I'll tell you that right now. I guess maybe the bigger question is, do you have to drop Hart or Brogdon for Paul Reed?
Yes. Well, so the Brogdon thing, like you said, there's been a lot of Knicks whispers. I think that would make a lot of sense for a number of reasons. It's like if he ends up there, what is the ultimate role at that point? Is he coming off the bench? Do they try to slide him into the starting lineup? There's probably a little bit lower upside than we're seeing in Portland, but even if you take like 85% of what he's giving you this year, it's still a pretty productive player. I was waiting for you to bring up do we actually need to add Paul Reed? I bid on him in a bunch of leagues this weekend. I was careful not to go overboard because, he started 4 of the last 5 games. He's played serious minutes really in only like 1.5 of those. There was that game where like everybody was out in Denver and he played 42 minutes. He played 24 minutes against Portland, played 28 minutes against Utah, was not in foul trouble in either of those games, and then started and played 15 minutes against Brooklyn on Saturday. So, I don't, obviously he's like the clear, all right, he's going to see more minutes. He'll be in the starting lineup, whatever, without Embiid, but it's not necessarily all right, now you're filling every single minute that Joel Embiid played situation. And the Sixers have had so many other guys in and out that it's been tough to gauge what that rotation will look like. Like they basically have like at least 2 or 3 rotation players out, including Melton, Maxey, Tobias Harris. Those guys have missed time lately. So it has been really difficult to assess. I still think like I want Paul Reed, but if I have to drop Hart or Brogdon, I don't know. That becomes a tougher decision. Like I assume you're in a relatively shallow league. Like if those are your 2 worst players, you're doing okay.
Says he responded with a follow-up. Mr. A says, my centers are Hartenstein and Evan Mobley. He needs a third center. Okay. So yeah, if you need Reed, I'm just gonna pull the Band-Aid off. I'm gonna say you drop Brogdon because I'm worried about him getting traded or getting hurt or getting shut down. Like there are 3 factors kind of revolving around him where there's really only one sort of negative factor around Hart. And yeah.
Okay. Ricardo says, speaking of Reed, he said, I drop Reed and Josh Hart to activate Kyrie and DeAnthony Melton. Obviously you got to activate Kyrie. I don't think there's any question there. Melton, I don't know exactly what you're saying here, but he's not playing tonight. We have really no idea when he's going to be back. We're obviously pretty low on games before we get to the All-Star break. They play Wednesday, they play Friday, they play Saturday. So they are one of just a handful of teams that has 4 games this week. And then most teams only play, 2 games next week. So that's kind of negligible. But you don't have to activate Melton right now, right? I guess unless you're really confident that he's coming back later this week, and you already know he's not playing 1 game. So, if you already made this move, we'll see. Hopefully Melton plays later in the week, but I would say for now you could probably hold on to one of Reed or Hart, right?
Yeah, Melton. Yeah, you're gonna want Melton over I think Reed or Hart. I think it's just safer. Matt points out in the chat that Paul Reed was sick last game, where he played 15 minutes, put up 2 points, 4 rebounds, nothing else. That is true, but his minutes as a starter have been really up and down in general. 25 minutes per game in 12 starts. Some of those are 17, some of those are 40. So it is hard to say, but definitely worth mentioning. He was sick last game, which is why he played especially bad.
All right, Matt says he's in a high-scoring Yahoo points league with points for all counting stats. Should he drop Harrison Barnes, Jalen Suggs, or Grayson Allen?
My gut reaction is to tell you to drop Harrison Barnes. He's still on his streak of double-digit shot attempts. He after his bad 9-point performance, he went for 22 and then he went for 11. I just think ultimately, Barnes has a very little history of especially lately, being a consistently good player. For fantasy. Suggs also pretty up and down, but I don't trust Fultz to stay healthy. And Grayson Allen is almost too good to drop. I get that, like, he's not. Allen is a better a better category league player than points league, but the Suns have been pretty. They're comfortable playing him 30 minutes every single game, regardless of who's available. Like, if the whole team is healthy, Grayson Allen's still getting 30 minutes, so that's very helpful.
Yeah, I know Grayson Allen has not played super well lately. It's kind of been battled through that ankle injury. He had one game where he was forced out, missed the next game, and maybe he's been hobbled a little bit. I would still drop Harrison Barnes here, especially if you're saying you get legitimate points for every category. Even when Harrison Barnes had that improbable 3 or 4 game run, it was basically just scoring. He'll mix in 4 or 5 rebounds, but he doesn't really give you assists. He doesn't really do anything on defense. So if I'm choosing between those 3, I would drop Barnes. All right, Scarlett says, sitting at rank 1 right now in a 9-cat league, 16-teamer. Nice work. What do you do if your players are all a must roster? Thinking streaming is important come playoffs. You're not wrong about that. Obviously, it kind of depends who we're talking about at the end of the roster, but it's a pretty good problem to have, right? I mean, if you're sitting first in your league, there's a reason for that. It's not necessarily streaming, but I think you just play the matchups, you play the number of games down the stretch, and you kind of stream within your own roster. I wouldn't go out of your way to drop someone now because you're worried about what might happen a month from now. Like, statistically speaking, chances are, one of these guys might get hurt and make that decision for you.
Yeah, exactly like Nick said. What do? I think you start gloating in the league chat, maybe. Just be like, one of you guys going to do something about me dominating this league all the time? But no, you don't want to drop anybody early. You could always make a consolidation trade if you really feel like streaming's that important. Like, trade 2 of your guys for one better guy. If you really feel like you want to, or feel like you have to stream to win. But other than that, I think you just kind of wait to see what the trade deadline brings and potential injuries.
All right, talked about Dosunmu. That was a good note there from Dylan. All right, Trayton Littlejohn says he's got a crazy trade question. Paul George, Miles Bridges, and Embiid for Anthony Edwards. I think that's Jalen Williams, and Jordan Poole in a points league. So George, Bridges, and Embiid for Edwards, Williams, and Poole. We're assuming that this was, just proposed. So, the Embiid part of this to me is kind of a wash. So it's basically Paul George and Miles Bridges for Edwards, Williams, and Poole.
As we've been saying at the beginning of the year, at this point, Embiid and Poole is a wash. Poole doesn't have to be rostered. Like, there's no reason to feel like you have to roster Poole. So I don't even really view him as a part of this trade. I mean, he's fine. He had a stretch where he played well, but like, he's okay. He's really only like a fringe points league player. And Embiid might be done for the year, fantasy season. He might be done for the fantasy season. So really, yeah, this is Paul George and Miles Bridges for Anthony Edwards and J-Dub, which is fair-ish, unless you think Miles Bridges is going to get traded to like a potential contender, and then he's going to play 24 minutes a game instead of like 34 minutes a game. So I think I would rather be on the Edwards J-Dub side of this trade.
I think so too. And look, I mean, if you're getting Poole as a throw-in, whatever, sitting at the end of your bench, if he gets hot, you could throw him out there, you could drop him, you could stream that spot. But yeah, I guess, part of this, we kind of have to discuss the Embiid part is like, would there be any part of you where you're like, man, what if he does come back sooner? And I really regret, not having him for the final 2 weeks of the fantasy season, or is that just something you can't really consider?
I don't think you have to. Okay, so like, yes, maybe he does come back for the end of the regular season, but what are the odds he's playing 25 minutes a game for the part of the fantasy playoffs that matter? Like, he might be playing like 18, 19 minutes a game leading up to the actual NBA playoffs. So that would, even if you get him back, you might say back to backs, maintenance. Like, it's really unclear.
Jerome says, do you think Josh Giddey gets traded this week? It's definitely possible. What would you say percentage chances that Josh Giddey is on another team come Thursday night?
I don't know. I mean, I think they would. For just completely on-court reasons, I think trading Giddey makes sense. I don't think they need him and SGA and Jalen Williams, and so. But I don't know what team wants him necessarily. I might put it at, just because I have no idea, I'm going to put it at like 20% because I don't feel like I've heard anything that makes a ton of sense. But OKC, in terms of like management, they're pretty tight-lipped. Like rumors don't really come out of OKC like they do other teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's in his third year, so you got, kind of at least one more year on the rookie deal. So I think there is some appeal there. Although if you're trading for him, you're probably looking at it as, you hope it works out and you sign him to an extension. I do think it makes some sense, right? I mean, Oklahoma City definitely does not need to make a move. They are sitting at the top of the Western Conference right now, so I don't know that there's a ton of pressure to do that. And I think it would be more likely maybe that you're attaching picks and you try to get a bigger fish in there, but. As we mentioned, there's just not that many names that make a ton of sense. And I think OKC is also trying to be really careful about not messing up what they have, right? It's like going out and getting some like top 25 player. It's like does that throw off the development of guys like Jalen Williams, who's kind of having like a borderline all-star start to the season. Obviously, SGA has been fantastic. I think where it makes sense is you're either adding shooting, because that's not what Josh Giddey does, or you're adding a big man. Right. I don't think you're swapping him out for another guard or swapping him out for another wing. Like they need spot up shooting. And I think more than anything, they need interior defense. They need another option beyond Chet Holmgren. So putting Giddey on the table, I think it's appealing. I think he has a lot of value. I think his value is certainly lower now than it was coming into the year. But again, like who's the player out there? It's like, do you flip him for like a PJ Washington? I don't know.
Yeah, because you're only really talking about teams that are already bad or who would be wanting to pull the plug. You'd be looking basically like everybody in the East that's, I guess, technically Atlanta and below, but more like Brooklyn and below. I think in the West, it's more like Utah and below, probably not including Houston or really Golden State. But yeah, it's like, do you send him to Brooklyn and to try to get Mikal Bridges or something, along with a bunch of other picks, that kind of a thing. But it's hard for me to say, like, do I expect him to get traded? I don't know.
Dude, I actually love that idea. That more salary would have to go and whatnot, but Bridges in OKC, like that is the type of star player I would add. I don't know that this is a team that needs like, I don't know, like Donovan Mitchell or a player like that. You're like, all right, you're the number one guy now, or you're co-number one. It's like somebody who's a star but is also kind of a role player at the same time. I mean, there's a reason that basically every team would like to have Mikal Bridges. So you're saying like if you're a contending team, you're not really that interested in Giddey?
No, he's too young, and he has no he has no real. I don't think he has much of a history of honestly making OKC better in any way. Like, he's intriguing because he's a great passer, but at the same time, I think he has a lot of holes in his game that it's just these guys who are great. They have great size and they can pass. There's so many more of these guys in terms of like an influx into the NBA because taller players are more skilled now, but he can't defend and he can't shoot threes. So it's just the spot for him. It's like, who wants a guy like that? If you're good, if you have a floor spacing 5, I guess, but I don't know. I don't know if he's that impactful. Like it's a different issue, but you talk about Ben Simmons in that way. And you talk about like the Thompson twins, who I love, much better prospects than Giddey. They're better defenders than Giddey, but they can't shoot. They're worse shooters than Giddey. And it's like, if you can't shoot or you can't play defense, it really, I think, limits your value to a contender.
I don't know what contending team, doesn't want to add bad shooting and bad defense, dude. I have no idea what you're talking about. I think you're completely
exactly.
The two teams I would point to, and I wouldn't consider either of them a contender, but they're at least above the Atlanta Mendoza line, would be like Indy and Orlando. It's like you can see Orlando taking a shot on a guy like that. They kind of already have a kind of a playmaking wing in Banchero, obviously, and then Franz Wagner. I think they feel pretty good about their roster, but that's type of player, young on a rookie deal that you can see Orlando bringing in. It's like, is there something to be built around, Wendell Carter trade? I think that would make a ton of sense for Oklahoma City. That's something I could see coming together. And then, Indiana, it's like, could you do like a Buddy Hield, Josh Giddey swap? Again, I'd have to, dig a little deeper on that to see how that would add up contract wise. But, I think those are teams that are hoping to win a playoff series, probably not hoping to win the NBA title, where you could kind of justify the, get the talent in the door and we'll try to develop it over the next couple of years strategy.
I think it makes more sense for Indy because they have Miles Turner at the 5, and
yes,
I think that's more of a move. I think getting Healed back would be nice. For OKC, my concern with Orlando is they already can't shoot to save their lives. And I don't know how much you want to take the ball out of the hands of like Wagner and Banchero,
right.
but then I don't want to make the argument that like they shouldn't have a point guard, because I think it's helpful. So yeah, both intriguing at least.
Yeah, Utah's another team that intrigues me, kind of in that middle zone as well, out in the West. All right, good question here from Mr. A. Two similar players. I assume this is kind of a who would you rather roster going forward, Dosunmu or Jaden Ivey?
Yeah, I saw that question. I looked it up earlier, kind of in anticipation, because that is a very good question. I think I would rather take Ivey. It depends if you're like desperate. If you're in a category league and you're desperate for blocks and steals, I'm okay with adding Dosunmu over Ivey. But at this point, it seems like Ivey's gotten the trust of Monty Williams, and his minutes have been pretty steady in like the high 20s, low 30s with Cade Cunningham back, and he's producing well. I think Ivey's the safer bet long term.
Yeah, again, similar players. They rank in the same zone over the last month. I think you said it right. Where like there's a lot more defensive potential with Dosunmu. Like if you look at some of like the 8-cat, 9-cat ranks, he'll probably rank a little bit higher, because of the scarcity of those stats. So again, yeah, if you need blocks and steals, if that's what you're worried about, I would say definitely Dosunmu, because Ivey really doesn't give you a whole lot of that. He'll have his splash games every now and then. It feels like he either gives you like 2 steals or 2 blocks or absolutely nothing. So you're going to get a lot more consistent defensive production out of Dosunmu. But I think you're right. If you're just kind of looking for traditional points, rebounds, assists, kind of higher minutes floor night to night, it's probably Ivey. But again, with LaVine out of the lineup here, as long as Chicago doesn't do something drastic and bring in a young guard or two, I do think Dosunmu could actually end up playing more minutes, or at least comparable minutes, the rest of the way.
I do. I think Dosunmu's history of meaningfully in a big way scaling up his usage isn't that great. He's doing it recently to an extent. Like his assist production is better. He's taking 10 shots a game basically. But I think I would just rather have Ivey in general.
All right. Dylan says, is it officially time for everyone to give Aaron Nesmith some more love? He's quietly putting up top 70 numbers since the Bruce Brown trade. He's been a top 40 player over the last 2 weeks, almost 2 stocks, 2+ made threes, 15 points, 6 rebounds in that span. I think so. I'm on board with giving Aaron Nesmith some respect. What say you? Do you respect him?
I'm putting respect on his name. I'm giving him his flowers. No, Nesmith, if you listen to the Friday podcast, it's a very pro Nesmith podcast. I think we've mentioned him as a waiver wire pickup probably like 4 times this year at various points throughout the year. And I think we actually recommended him in back-to-back shows this Friday and last Friday. So yeah, I mean, he's playing really well. He's figured his shot out, which has been huge for him. He had that one bad season in Boston that I think made everybody in Boston turn on him. And since then, he has been very good. And especially, this past 2 weeks or so.
He's at 46% from 3 for the year. 46%. Yep. And that is the Aaron Nesmith that was promised, right? I mean, when he was at Vanderbilt, I mean, that was the selling point. It's like this guy, he's not just like a 38, 39% shooter. It's like he could be the best spot up shooter in the NBA. Like that's the sell here on Nesmith. And yeah, he was fine as a rookie. He was fine, even at times last year in Indy, but we're now seeing, the full on, kind of Duncan Robinson type of maturation, I guess, for Aaron Nesmith. And we'll see if that, is able to go year to year, right? It's not often that you see somebody have this crazy of a season, where you shoot 45+% from 3, and then you can do it again the next year. My guess is he probably regresses a little bit, but if you're regressing from 46% to 42 or 43%, that's still ultra elite. And the one thing is I'd like to see a little more volume. Like if you're shooting 46%, you got to be doing everything you can to be taking 8 or 9 a game instead of like 4 or 5 a game. But yeah, in general, all in on respecting Aaron Nesmith. And here's a good one from Drew as a follow-up: Nesmith or Dosunmu in an ESPN league?
I think Nesmith is probably the better category league player. Dosunmu might be the better points. It's close, honestly. Do you have a strong preference on either of these guys?
Right now would be Nesmith. He's not only is he giving you a ton of threes, but he's especially lately, last couple of weeks, he's been close to 2 blocks and steals per game. So I don't think there's like a huge drop off there necessarily compared to Dosunmu. He's a more reliable rebounder. He's actually been a pretty decent passer. The thing I worry about with Indy more so than Chicago is just kind of the whims of this rotation. Like it's really tough when you go through and try to project minutes, night to night for that team because they have guys who've kind of mixed in here and there. And, early in the year, Nesmith was coming off the bench. There were some nights where he was playing like 18 minutes a game. His minutes have been pretty steady, so I'm not super worried about it. But there is a big difference between, playing 34 minutes a night, which is what he's doing over the last 2 weeks, and, playing 26 minutes a night, which is what he was doing over the previous month. So, if you think he's playing 32 plus minutes a night, I would lean Nesmith. But yeah, it's a good question.
Dosunmu will probably be better if DeRozan got traded or the Bulls shut guys down. Like Dosunmu is just going to be better, but
yeah,
we have no idea. So I think Dosunmu is the floor, is the ceiling play. Like if you are, I don't know, 6th or 5th in your league and you just need it's all upside plays. I think I would actually rather have Dosunmu, but if it's just all things equal, probably Nesmith.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it. All right, Dylan says 9-cat league. Let's talk Wizards. All right, we're gonna see the viewership is about to skyrocket. Feels like they're trading Kuzma, Tyus, Gafford, and Delon Wright. That would be quite the change. I think at least a couple of those guys probably get dealt. Who are we liking best for silly season? Kispert, Koulibaly, or even this Omarui or Omarui?
I think it's Omarui.
I pride myself, Alex, on knowing at least like a little bit about every player in the league. There's been a couple times in the last few weeks where I've had to be like, all right, what's going on here? Washington's been one of those teams, and more recently the Memphis Grizzlies. When I saw Trey Jameson in the starting lineup, that was one where I had to go over to Basketball Reference, hand up.
Yeah, and for Memphis, is it Tosan Ewoma? That was a tough one. Yeah, but Omarui, I think you're right to bring up the Wizards 100% because they're horrible and they have veterans on the team that could get moved. Koulibaly, I think, he had a pretty good outing the other day. I think it was when Poole got scared of Kawhi Leonard and mysteriously had an illness. But then he followed that up with 5 points and then 0 points. So I still think out of all those guys, Koulibaly probably has the highest upside because he is a good defender. And I think they would like to just see what they have in him. Like, can he handle the ball at all? Can he do more? He just hasn't proven it really. I'm a big Corey Kispert guy, which I know sounds probably weird and kind of obscure. I think he can, if they start giving him 35 minutes, I think he can play awesome, to be honest with you. But I think there's also honestly a decent chance that they trade him because he would be perfect for a contender. So that's tough to say, but I think it's fine to stash Bilal. I think it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the Wizards trading, 3 starters and one of their better, more reliable veteran bench players and Delon Wright, it's like anything's on the table at that point. I mean, you'd be looking at 2 or 3 guys who are probably worth picking up because they'd just be pretty low on players. But you also have to keep in mind if you think they're trading that many players, it's not going to be all picks. You're getting some guys back, and a few of those guys will probably be young and will be in the starting lineup. So I wouldn't get too excited about it. I mean, Koulibaly to me, I'm intrigued by what he could be long term. He's made a handful of starts this year. Some have been good, some have been horrendous. Even when he's had a bunch of games where he's played 30 plus minutes. Again, very, very up and down. But I'm intrigued, and I'm with you on Kispert. I think Kispert's the safest, highest floor option. Like, if he suddenly starts playing 38 minutes a game for a terrible Wizards team, I mean, he could give you 4.5 made threes a game. Like, he's that good of a shooter. And if he would, in a way, become their number one option, which is a scary thought, but it is possible with the way the Wizards are going. He's a guy I would want, in a category league, especially getting that high volume 3-point production. All right, good question about the Knicks here for Pedro. He said he wanted to add Paul Reed, so he had to choose between dropping Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo. He said he chose Josh Hart. I think that means he actually dropped DiVincenzo. So he chose to keep Josh Hart, thinking that his court time seems safer when OG comes back. In our opinion, did he make the right call?
Yeah, I think so, because Hart is more of like a forward to replace Randall's minutes. When OG comes back, DiVincenzo is more of like a guard, even though they're basically the same size. But Hart will rebound and stuff like that. I think he made the right choice. I don't want to make this longer. I think he made the right choice.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think there's no right or wrong choice here. I think those guys are both going to be really comparable. I think DiVincenzo is going to have his nights where you wish you would have kept him. But I think on balance, if we're talking the next 35 games, you'll probably get a little bit more consistency and floor with Josh Hart. Matt says, do you prefer to hold your ads until after the deadline, or do you treat it as a normal week? Very good question.
Yeah, I don't play in a lot of like daily moves capped leagues, but I would hold my ads. I think I talk about this a lot. Like the most impactful, I would say probably 3 waiver periods are of the entire year are the one before the first game starts, the one the week after, basically after the first week of the season, and then the week of the trade deadline. So I would save all of your ammo and just wait until the trade deadline hits, and then you gotta just go crazy with your moves. Then I would just hold them.
Alec asks, is Bruce Brown a trade deadline hold, considering dropping him and Fultz when my injured players get back? I said he's also holding Malik Monk, Ausar Thompson, and Dennis Smith Jr. I mean, I've heard a lot of rumblings that Bruce Brown could be on the move again. Obviously it would depend where he would land. I think, plenty of contending or pseudo contending teams would be interested. It hasn't exactly taken off in Toronto. He started a handful of games. He's come off the bench for about half. Had a nice run. He was putting up a bunch of blocks and steals, but really inconsistent. So, I guess I would hold him and just hope that he lands in a better situation. I guess I've never been that enamored with Bruce Brown. I think he was in a perfect role in Denver, and I think we're kind of chasing, finding that perfect fit again. And there's just not, to me, there's not that much upside. It's like what is a best case scenario? Bruce Brown, he's hovering around like the 90th best fantasy player.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. He's 27. He's not like a young guy. So if he gets traded, I assume it's to like a contender, and then he's basically a 6 man and probably not worth rostering. I think him and Fultz are droppable. I don't have any faith in Fultz staying healthy. I think it's good to hold Monk. Honestly, very strong willpower by you to not drop Monk during this recent stretch, and he had bounce back games in his last 2. And Ausar and DSJ. I roster DSJ. I want it to happen. We'll see I would hold him just because I don't know what the Nets are going to do. And Ausar is forever intriguing, but it's just not happening. I don't know.
All right. Zazao says, who are y'all taking in a points league, PJ Washington or Paul Reed? Another good question. A lot of tough ones today. The chat's bringing it.
Yeah, this is a really tough point of the year. And I think I would take Reed, but it's probably closer than I think most people would just be like, just get Paul Reed. But I think it is pretty close because we talked about this earlier. Reed's minutes as a starter, not that consistent. He's technically a better fantasy points per minute guy, 1.1 to PJ Washington, 0.9. But if the minutes are going to be, this different, then it's almost a wash. I think I would just rather have Reed, but it's close.
Yeah. Mark Williams is, we think, coming back at some point. That affects things. I do think it's possible Washington. I think Washington could be moved, and I don't think it would necessarily be a better situation, right? I mean, he's been even though he hasn't been starting the majority of these games, he's been playing on a bad team that still, puts up a reasonable amount of points. Is involved in all these like weird shootout games where they end up losing by 20. And he's playing like almost 30 minutes a game over the last month. If he's traded, I don't see him being in that ideal of a situation. And the other thing is, this is a points league, and a big part of the reason that PJ Washington is valuable is he's a big man who shoots threes. And it's not as rare as it was a few years ago, but he's hitting 2 threes a game, and you're not quite as concerned about that in a points league. So I am very skeptical. And you can tell me like anything happens with Paul Reed, in the next 2 weeks, either, you can tell me he averages 18.8 minutes per game despite starting, or he averages 30 minutes per game and is, the season savior. But I think that's where I would lean in a points league specifically. All right. Drello28 says, which players are a must stash so far? He just got into the chat. Who have we'll do a recap, I guess, of who we've mentioned. Okongwu, if he's still out there, he is still available in like 30% of Yahoo leagues, so double check. We talked about Drummond. We talked about Scoot. I guess Ayo Dosunmu could be considered a stash. Might be picked up in a bunch of leagues already. Corey Kispert. A number of the Wizards, Koulibaly. I think those are the main ones, right? I mean, if we really want to go deep, I know somebody we've talked about is like Nick Smith in Charlotte. Not somebody I would go pick up right now. That's a wait and see. If they purge that roster, maybe. But anybody else come to mind? Would you consider Ausar a stash?
Yeah, I was just about to say Ausar.
Okay.
People bring up Ausar and Amen together. I actually don't know if Amen's a big stash because I think Houston just really wants to win and they're going to continue playing their normal rotation. I don't really think that they're going to make any big moves. He's a stash in the sense that if you really think he's contributing to winning, he's going to start seeing 25 minutes a game. He's been, the past 12 games, 19 minutes, 26 fantasy points, which is great. I mean, if you really want to roster him like a 12-team points league, go ahead. But I wouldn't expect him to start suddenly seeing 30 minutes a game like Ausar might if the Pistons really pull the plug.
Yeah. He should, man. I mean, I don't know what we're doing. I think, to me, that would be a Bogdanovich trade, right? And then it's like, all right, the minutes have to go to him. They absolutely have to. There's no justification to keep, rolling Kevin Knox out there the way they have. I would put him on my list. Somebody else I'll throw out there, and this is deep leagues only, somebody who actually helped carry me to a title in a league last year when I was, playing the matchups, playing the schedule game, had some injuries. Isaiah Joe. Oh, he had some big games toward the end of last year. And this ties into what we talked about with Josh Giddey earlier. If you're trading Giddey, which I don't know if they will. You said what, 20% chance? I think that it's probably closer to 20% than it is 50% for me. But if they trade Giddey, you're looking to get a veteran back and maybe it's a wash. But if the goal is, all right, get more shooting out there. And if you can get Isaiah Joe to 24, 25 minutes a night, even, you're looking at like 3 made threes a game. He's had 9 games this year where he's played at least 25 minutes and he's averaging 3 made threes on 48%. So, somebody who's been hurt lately, minutes have been down prior to that. Again, we're talking deep leagues only, but if you're like hard up for 3-pointers, that's somebody I would consider.
Deep category leagues.
Yes.
I would say.
No points leagues. Yes. Category only. No. All right. Claude Santos says, you think Melo's coming back? I don't see Carmelo making a return to the NBA. No. LaMelo. This has absolutely killed my NFBKC team, dude. I mean, I really love my team. I still love my roster, and I've gotten 22 games out of the guy who I took with like the 14th overall pick in that league. I don't know if he's coming back, man. I would say it's more likely than not that he does. He's missed 5 games in a row. I think tonight will be 6. There's been no indication that this is like week to week, although it seems to be turning into that. I don't really think Charlotte needs him to be out to be terrible. I mean, they are 10-38. What's going to be interesting though is, like the battle for those final 4 spots with the same lottery odds. I don't really see Charlotte falling out of that. They have about a 5-game cushion on Portland right now, so that would be kind of the only other team to monitor. But again, it's not like they're ripping off wins when LaMelo's in the lineup. So I think he comes back at some point. I would be surprised if we've seen fully the last of it, but he might come back and then get hurt again.
True. I would say I would believe he's coming back, but would not be shocked if it was until after the All-Star break. That's well said.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. All right, we'll end on this one from Nomad. He says, Ausar or Amen, rest of season, who do you want? I would say Ausar. I trust that situation a little bit more, but there may not be a correct answer here.
Yeah, I would say Ausar because they're not the same player. I think Amen probably has higher upside, just like pure fantasy points per game, point per minute, whatever, however you want to phrase it. But I think that there is a better chance that Ausar sees 30 minutes a game for the last month and a half than Amen.
Yes, that's exactly my line of thinking. Yeah, I think over the last month, like Embiid's probably been the better option, but it's, it's not like he's lighting the world on fire, right? I mean, both of them are putting up great defensive numbers. They both rebound extremely well for their size and position. Embiid's a little bit better of a passer. The shooting has been about what you'd expect. The 3-point shooting is disastrous. The nice thing is neither of them are taking that many, so it's not killing them field goal percentage wise. But I want to see what a men's role looks like. I mean, Tari Eason could be back this week. I think it's expected that he's back this week. He's missed a month plus. That's yet another wing that you're throwing into the mix here. I worry about what that means for his minutes. I think there's a better chance that, I'm not really high on this Houston team, but they're in the play-in zone. And they are, they've won way too many games where they could try to get down to the bottom 4. So I think they kind of have to go for it. It's not like they have all these obvious sell-off players. So I think it's more likely that over the meaningful, final month of like the fantasy season or the fantasy playoffs, that Embiid is playing like 14 minutes a game and Ausar is playing 28. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I think, the point about Tari Eason's great because Tari Eason's not a big name or anything. People might roll their eyes with because they might be like, well, it's just Tari Eason. Why wouldn't you give, Amen Thompson minutes over Tari Eason? Tari Eason still leads the Rockets in plus minus. So he's going to be out there if he's healthy.
All right, man. We'll wrap it up here. Great questions. As always, everybody. Appreciate everyone following along, throwing us questions in the chat. We're always happy to answer those. You could comment on the video. We'll throw timestamps in there as well if you want to skip through to a certain section, but throw some comments on there. We'll always go in and answer those. Please please subscribe. That helps us out immensely. If you've enjoyed these throughout the year, that is huge. If you could give us a like and a subscription over on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel. We will be back on Tuesday with Dr. A hosting. I'll be back with Brandon Kravitz on Wednesday. We'll have Rick and Dr. A together. That's Rick Kamla, from NBA TV. They'll be hosted on Thursday, and then Alex will be with Ken and Shannon for the usual waiver wire episode on Friday. Appreciate everybody listening. Like, subscribe, go check us out on rotowire.com. You can follow us on Twitter as well. We will talk to you next Monday.